friends. The other day we did a quartet session, and one of the segments or the aspects of the elements of quartet is that we talk about what's been on our mind. We start out, if you've ever watched it, by running around the table and saying, what have you been thinking about? And when it came to me, I said, I've been thinking about Jimmy Buffett, who died this last week. And Jimmy Buffett was a really interesting guy. I think that I could make a pretty persuasive case that he has brought more joy to more people than just about anybody that's been alive in my lifetime, which is not an insignificant thing. It's intriguing because as a entertainer, he of course did concerts and things and records all over the place, just like other entertainers do. But if you've ever been to a major concert, I mean, I've been to a couple or three in my life. Went to hear Elton John once, many years ago. And it was just magnificent. I mean, the guy just carried on for 3 hours, let his band go take a break, and he soldiered on, and it was just, you just walked out and you were kind of euphoric about the whole thing. And we went up to New York to see Leonard Cohen, and it was a spiritual experience. We were in Madison Square Garden with, I don't know, 26,000 other close friends or something. And it was like being in a cathedral, literally. You started off and it was just, there wasn't a sound in the place. And the guy stood up there and said, I'm so happy that you've all come. And we're gonna do our best to give the love and the compassion and whatever. And I'd never heard anybody kind of kick off a concert like that. And then he went on, and it was like going to church. And so, I've seen some of these kinds of things. Some of those events have kind of a long tail to them, and so they kind of linger around and hang around in your head for 10 days or some other kind of thing. But there's a point at which you like the records or the tunes on your phone, and you check it out every once in a while, but it's not an integral part of your life going forward, unless you were a deadhead, right? Okay, unless you went to the Grateful Dead and you were big time into drugs and other things and followed them around all over the place. But the Deadheads were not that big a crowd following the guy around, and no one could suggest that this was a community that was full of joy, and that the world was materially better because of the Grateful Dead or the followers of the Grateful Dead. I don't know. You could argue about that maybe, but maybe you get the sense of what I'm saying. All right. But Jimmy Buffett was something else. Jimmy Buffett, not only, I went to a Jimmy Buffett concert. We ended up here in Baltimore. And it wasn't the best. It was a crummy venue and so on, but you got a sense of the whole thing. That Jimmy Buffett captured an essential aspect of the human experience. And that piece of us that wants to be free and fun and enjoy each other and so on. And he turned that into a global movement, if you will. Because if you know anything about Jimmy Buffett, you know about parrot heads, and parrot heads are all these kind of like the deadheads, but they're parrot heads, and so they get together, and I don't know anything about deadheads and how they kind of party or anything, but I do know a little bit about Buffett, and what I know is that these guys would get together at noon or maybe even earlier before a concert, and they'd all tailgate and they'd all dress up in all of these funny kind of parrot and other kinds of tropical kind of garb. And they would just start partying at noon. And by the time you got to the concert, and I've never been at a concert like this before, but when you went into the Coliseum or whatever they called the building is where the concert was, they had guys selling beer every 3 aisles all the way around the place. I mean, they were juicing the place up like crazy, and everybody was just going nuts and having a great time. And it's not like, they'd never heard the songs before, because they all knew the names, the words for the songs. And I became kind of the reason why Diane and I went up to Baltimore to go to this concert was because there was this officer in the little regional bank where Diane worked here in Berkeley Springs, who had been to 55 Jimmy Buffett concerts. And you say to yourself, what in the world's going on here? I mean, what do you mean going to 55? I mean, how many times do you need to hear the songs? And so there was something at a whole different level that was going on. And it was bigger than Buffett, if you will, right? That he had plumbed down into this essential aspect of this human desire to engage and have joy and fun, and nobody did any stupid stuff. I mean, it depends on how you define stupid, of course, but it's nobody got hurt or anything like that. It wasn't like a big drug thing with like so many hard rock stuff or anything. They were just having a good time. And what, land shark beer or whatever he calls this, I mean, that was all part of it. I mean, this guy, and if you read the story about it, he got in partnership with some guy who was a investment banker or something, who had a real sense for these kinds of things. And they figured out that this whole, what do they call it? I'll remember the term. It's a unique, it's a characteristic of the kind of music that he played. And they figured out that there was something going on here that was a whole lot bigger than, just concerts or something. Now, if you've looked at any of the obituaries and the articles that have been written about this guy, you will recognize some of the things I'm going to tell you. But if you haven't, it's an interesting story, because this started, of course, he had this song that was famous called Margaritaville, which, as he explains, he started to write in the airport in Austin or someplace, waiting for an airplane, and finished it up on the airplane going over back to Key West or wherever it was that he was living at the time. And this idea of Margaritaville had this larger kind of notion. It wasn't just a little ditty kind of a song, but it was about a it's more than a lifestyle. It's a life concept, maybe you could call it, or something. It was something like that said, there's a place to live that's just kind of wonderful and everything. Now, admittedly, it certainly had alcohol and a little bit of some drugs overtones. I mean, after all, the band was called the Coral Reefer Band. And so, sure, yeah, it was all those kinds of things, but they tapped into the essential aspect of an essential aspect of who we are as human beings. And they then turned it into an enterprise. He started off, he had this song called Cheeseburger in Paradise and Margaritaville, and he started a restaurant. He said, I just wanted a place where I could play. And so he started his own restaurant down in Key West called Margaritaville. And then that's when this guy from New York showed up, and they got together, and they figured out that this whole kind of notion and how what they wanted to do was a whole lot bigger than this. Now, you can read the story at your leisure, any of a number of places. I'd recommend one particular article by in the New Yorker. There have been a couple here. The guy who wrote the New Yorker article, which ran last year, is now then did a kind of an obituary kind of thing the other day, and to kind of close the loop on that whole business. But yeah, Jimmy Buffett wasn't this. I mean, if you know anything about Jimmy Buffett, you know that he wrote these New York Times best-selling books. He was a playwright. He wrote plays and other stuff. I mean, this is a guy, and on top of that, then he had this amazing kind of commercial operation that some of the reports say made him a billionaire when he died. He was always one of the clear way at the top of the most successful celebrities that there were, even though he never had a number one song in all of his life. I mean, and you got to remember that he's had, I don't know, 8 songs that reached some of the top 10 or something like that. This is not like somebody that had bundles and bundles and long kind of things. He had this kind of, you got up there to where it got enough awareness, but it captured that essence of that people that kind of resonates down in the core of people, of all of us at some level or another, whether you've heard of him or not. And what they did was that they converted it into restaurant chains, and they did it into casinos and to housing developments. And ultimately, I mean, that's how you get to $1 billion, right? And ultimately, they understood their demographic well enough to know that now all of these people that had been following them all these years are now retiring, and so they're now into retirement communities, like really big time. I mean, the one that the article in New Yorker is about, one in Daytona Beach, Florida, which is called Latitudes Margaritaville. And if I remember right, it's got 3,500 homes, like single family homes in this thing. And his real estate partner in this thing has just bought 100,000 acres somewhere else over, I don't know where, Orlando or someplace, and they're going to do another bigger one. And so let me explain and tell you the story that makes the point that I'm trying to make here. So this article in the New Yorker last year was this slick New Yorker writer who went down to New York to find out what this was all about, this Margaritaville retirement thing, because what you know is that they're sucking all these people out of New York and New Jersey to come down to Florida to go live there. And so, it's probably a little bit of a deal. And so they're trying to understand how this works. And this writer was a wonderful writer, and so it's really fun to read this if you like good writing. But what he essentially did is that he went down saying, what is this? I'm going to go down. I'll go down there. I mean, he made a deal with them like they always do, and they said, come on down and you can try this and look around and you can explode. We'll let you, if you're going to write a story in the New Yorker about Latitude Margarita, come on down and we'll let you try out all the stuff that we do and down here so that you can be. So we went down to exercise things and classes and, any of a number of the kind of things that were part of the program at this retirement community. And then he ran around with a mic and a camera guy, I presume, or a photographer at least, interviewing these people, saying, "Why did you come here? What is this about? Why?" And there was a really a fascinating kind of snippet in one of his interviews, and he said there's a whole lot of kind of middle America that's down there, cops and firemen, and people of all that, but not universally at all. There's mortgage bankers from Wall Street or whatever that are all part of this. It's a kind of a full spectrum of folks, but he's talking to this guy and his wife that are down there and says, so tell me your story. What is this about? And the guy says, yeah, well, we decided to retire 4 years ago. And so my wife and I, we found this place over on the coast in Florida, and we lived there for 3 years. And he said, in all that time, we had four friends. We only made 4 friends in all the time we were there. And so we heard about this Margaritaville business, and I was not certainly not a Jimmy Buffett fan or any of that kind of stuff. And but we heard about it, and so we went over and looked, and it was kind of like they looked at each other and heard this story or whatever it was and said, yeah. And they moved from wherever they were on the coast of Florida over to this Latitudes. And the magic kind of phrase was, and now we have 100 friends. We just party all the time. We love each other. We just have so much fun. We just go from one thing to another. And then he says, my kids come down here to visit and they say, are you going to another party? It's just like this ongoing, wonderful kind of things. And they get to these stand-up bands that just get in a driveway, and people all come and drive their golf carts around and sit around and do it. And You know, one guy said, there's 4 bars here within 3 blocks or something, you know, something like that. It's just, and they're, you know, they're all very well lubricated. And it's just this amazing kind of thing that people are saying, this is the best time I've ever had in my life. Now, this is not an apologetic for alcohol or drugs or anything from me. I am not making the case that that's what everybody ought to do. What I am saying is that there is something in terms of community that these folks figured out that nobody else has figured out. There is something that is related to the essence of how we all as human beings want to relate to each other and how we want to get along and how we want to live our lives, that in their particular case, they built it around alcohol and music and other kinds of stuff. But it points to the future, to a possibility of a way to live in community in a new world, an emergent new world that has a whole different set of dynamics, and that the way you live, the way you relate to people, the way you come together, the way you have marvelous kind of events and relationships and whatever could give you, I mean, it's obvious. We have an example of thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have figured out that there is a different way to live. In their particular case, it's you know, related to margaritas and whatever, Mai Tais, I suppose. But that's not the point. The point is that somewhere in there, that what these guys have done is they have found that little bit, that's piece that's inside of all of us. And they have figured out how to then build the infrastructure and the process and everything around that. And as it turns out, that once you get people into that kind of a context, you don't have to orchestrate this stuff. I mean, you kind of just, you open it up and you just say you can do what you want to do, and you know, you provide the infrastructure and you know those kinds of stuff, and then people find these wonderful ways in which to live with each other and to just have a big party that keeps going all the time. I watched that and I listened to that and I read about that and I said, that's the new human and that's the new world. It's not about land shark beer and it's not about margaritas or anything like that, but there is a very interesting, essential kind of nugget in the middle of all of this about that there is a way in which you can build an environment, you can build a place, and it's not like any place else. I mean, where else, what other planned community or retirement community or anything else can you think about that has this other dimensional kind of character to it, you know, that embraces your whole life and brings you together with all of these other people, and you know, in the world that we might be able to build, that you could start to say and points you toward building a new world and you know, building a new human and other kinds of things. There's a very interesting kind of notion, a dynamic in the middle of all this, it seems to me, about what a new world could look like, or a new community of these, because this is about, I mean, it certainly probably doesn't scale behind. You need to have multiple kind of communities, different places. But if you kind of took away the rules and homeowners associations and, and the zoning and the whatever. And you just kind of let people, you just told them this was a place that we're all gonna have a good time. And and you provided the programmatic aspects to the thing, it isn't just kind of like you can lay it all on the table and ask everybody, what do you want to do? It's not like that. It's really like it's permitting. It's about giving you permission to and saying, this is what we're going to do and go. And there isn't anything else. And so I just really thought that there was a very interesting kind of idea in the middle of looking over the life of Jimmy Buffett. And as I said at the beginning, you could, who else do you know that has generated more joy with so many millions of people? Just, and not just in these one concert going away and you go back to your other life. It's just this expanded kind of zeitgeist, this is environment, this context that sees yourself and you sees the world in quite a different way. And so I thought that was pretty cool.